Okay, we're recording. So today's training is the training for autism leads in schools. It's going to be a combination of bits that can help those of you that work in primary settings and some information on how children in secondary settings can be supported. We're going to be covering the environment, and we're going to be covering sensory differences that impact upon learning. And the slides are full of links, and I will send everything through to you afterwards. So if you do have an interest in those areas and you want to dig in a little bit deeper to some of the resources that I found, please do. So in today's session, we're going to start off by looking at what sensory differences mean. We're going to look at the impact of sensory difference on learning. We're going to be thinking about how we can create an autism-friendly setting. Having been into lots of your schools, I'm actually quite impressed with many of the schools and the settings and how they run. But I've got some lovely tools that we can use to just upskill other members of staff and just make sure that they understand how we can be a little bit more autism friendly. Then we're going to be looking at supporting that sensory difference through some regulation strategies and sensory diets. And then lastly, and I won't go through it all, but I will send them all. I've got a ton of slides on resources for you, specifically for primary and then specifically for secondary. So in terms of sensory, information from our senses does travel into our brain where it is processed for meaning. And this can work quite differently for autistic people. So autistic individuals have been found to have considerable sensory processing differences compared to more typically developing children. And the context is quite important here because individuals that struggle in school may not struggle at home. Schools can be a little bit busier, be noisier, and be much more overwhelming. So that transition from home life into school life for our autistic young people can really cause some severe discomfort when they're unable to seek out or avoid that sensory input. So anyone can have sensory processing difficulties. It's not just autistic people. But obviously for this training purposes, we're really going to be thinking about how the sensory processing affects our autistic young people. Looking at that diagram there, you can be really over sensitive with any of your senses, but you could also be under sensitive, and this can change depending on the stimuli and also at different times of day. And it can also depend on how an individual is feeling. So some senses would be heightened if, for example, somebody was feeling more anxious. Now I've put on a lot of videos there, which you're very welcome to click on when I send them through to you, but these are real experiences explained by autistic individuals at how sensory overload impacts them. So some of them are done are talked through by young autistic people, and it's how they see their world. It's really worth having a little look through them, especially if you're going to be sharing some training with other people within your school. Now, I found these quotes, and I think they're really help us to understand exactly how things might feel for autistic young people. So I'm going to read through them here. The classroom is a teacher's mini kingdom and the home of your pupils for most of the school day. Teachers lavish care and attention on how it is set out and how they decorate it and spend time organising furniture and equipment that they and their pupils will need to access throughout the year. In primary classrooms, hours are spent printing, laminating and setting out displays and carefully choosing words, pictures and prompts for pupils writing maths and topic work. Coat pegs and drawers are labelled, boxes and books are given out, and groups of tables are given names. In the early years, parts of the room are often sectioned off into creative, small world or sensory play areas, and most classrooms have a common focus area, usually in front of the whiteboard, where pupils will gather to listen to the teacher presenting a lesson. At the beginning of the school year, the classroom is bright, stimulating, labelled, and ready for a new intake of people. Now imagine you are in a busy foreign railway station. You know you have to get somewhere, but you're not quite sure how to read the strange symbols that indicate the destination on your ticket. The signs are in a script that you don't recognise. The trains are loud, noisy, and smelly, and smell strongly of diesel. The buzzing crowd is pushing and jostling you in a direction you're not even sure you want to go to. Some people come towards you making attempts to grab your bag and you feel scared and threatened. Other people gesticulate with signs and mouth strange words, but you don't understand, and they soon go away. You spot what looks like an official and make your way to them, but they are just shouting random words in a language you don't understand through a megaphone. Your head hurts, you are sick with anxiety and frustration, and you have no idea how to cope. School can feel like this for pupils with autism spectrum condition. I just thought that was really quite powerful in explaining how, for someone who is perhaps neurotypical, might feel if they were put into a situation like many of our young people when they come into school each day. And it's just so important to note that there are so many differences in terms of sensory experience, and it's our job to really try and make things a little bit more easy at school in terms of adapting that environment to meet their needs. So in terms of those sensory differences, those feelings might be felt more or less intensely. Their response to stimuli can be more or less intense. The response might look like challenging behaviour, and I think especially in secondary school, because of masking, often some of these behaviours might be deemed as inappropriate or unacceptable. But we've got to bear in mind that for many of our young autistic people, it's due to that response to the stimulation that's in that environment and not necessarily anything to do with behaviour at all. Differences also include the ability to focus and to learn, and that can be compromised due to those sensory differences. And for us, without understanding those differences, we're not enabling our autistic students. So we've got to be really mindful of this. But with understanding, we are able to create those lovely autism-friendly environments and support those individual sensory needs. Now, everyone is completely individual, and so we need to be really adaptive to ensure that we really do support everybody that's within our care. So, as I said before, our individuals may be sensory seeking, they may be sensory avoiding, or they may be both, and this can look different at different times of day and over time. I really like this quote here as well, and I think it's really important to bear in mind, especially for our very academic pupils and especially our girls. We need to bear in mind that just because of the way we perceive them, that doesn't mean that it's not difficult for them to manage their emotions and their sensory experiences. So the quote here is, mild autism doesn't mean one experiences autism mildly. It means you experience their autism mildly. You may not know how hard they've had to work to get to the level that they are. And like we say, and often autism is completely hidden. And unless you've seen that paperwork and you understand that individual, you may not know that they are autistic. So it's really, really important that we have this general knowledge of how sensory differences can impact our autistic population. Talking from experience, sometimes even with the best will in the world, we get it wrong when we're trying to support our individuals to regulate. Sometimes that regulation or that sensory seeking or avoidance, we do interpret it as challenging, and it may be that we impact those autistic young people even more by either telling them off or telling them that the behaviour is inappropriate. But what it might mean for them is that they feel like they can't be themselves. And we just need to be really, really mindful of that. And I've got lots of examples which I'll go through shortly. Some of the differences are quite easily identified, but some of them are really difficult to identify, often due to the masking. And many individuals will be perceived to be managing when actually they're really, really trying hard, and it's really, really difficult to kind of hold it all together and present themselves as managing and coping. But as we know, many of those individuals end up going home and have a really tough time when they're finally able to be themselves. So I've got a list of all of the senses, and I've just got some suggestions on what those sensory differences might look like And I won't read everything through, but I really did like this quote here. I don't really understand why it's considered normal to stare at someone's eyeballs. And I used that quote when working with a young autistic person recently, when they explained to me, like, I just can't do it. And I think for us as practitioners, often we, we see eye contact as active listening, but for our autistic people, they're very, very capable of looking elsewhere and taking everything in. And so just being mindful of that. I'm going to flick through these, but this is what visual sensory differences might look like. We've got some auditory differences and what they might look like too. I think in some of our secondary schools, the behaviours will not be anywhere near as extreme as some of the examples I've put on here. And we really need to try and tune into those individuals and their differences. We've got some of the tactile differences here. Again, some of these are more extreme than others, and some of these you wouldn't know in the school environment, and it might be things that a parent might have said to you. They might explain to you, oh, they won't get their hair cut, or you might see that they haven't had their hair cut and think they look unkempt, but it may be a sensory difficulty. So it's just having that awareness. Again, taste and smell, some of course more obvious than others. Again, in the classroom, you may not notice these things, but it may be something you notice if you're, wandering around the school canteen, for example. You might see the same pupils eating the same things over and over again. And for them, that might be exactly what they need in order to feel comforted at that time. We've got vestibular here. I've got some proprioception information here. And again, some of these things are going to be perceived at times as challenging behaviours. I've had pupils in my class that are unable to refrain from touching items on my desk. And it's the simplest thing, and it's driven by their sensory needs. But as a teacher, it can be quite frustrating. So it's, managing ways or adapting one's environment to, really ensure that these individuals are able to succeed in our environments. And finally, interoception there, which is those internal body messages. Often these are felt more extremely too. So especially for our autistic individuals, if they're complaining of problems like a stomachache, feeling really unwell, it could be anxiety induced, or it could be that they didn't know they needed the toilet when it was playtime, and then suddenly they've got this sudden urge. So just being mindful of those things. Don't worry about writing notes, because I'll pop all the information through to you. So yeah, in terms of the challenges in the classroom, and I mentioned a couple of examples of where I've had difficulties with those kind of sensory challenges, because it's very difficult at times to make that call as to, is this challenging behaviour, or is this somebody's needs. So always being mindful that if they have a diagnosis of autism, it may well be that what is perceived as challenging is actually not at all, and it is a sensory difficulty. So obviously with those sensory processing challenges, they may result in that inattention and distraction. And that can be for a number of reasons, including that children who are hypersensitive to auditory stimuli may well be very distracted by noise, which obviously affects their ability to listen to those instructions and then follow them. Due to those tactile discrepancies, it may be that they cannot think or do anything because of the texture of their clothes or the labels. So just being mindful of school uniform policies and, can any adaptations be made? Some of our children or young people will be seeking out proprioceptive and vestibular input, and this might look like rocking or spinning. And for us, it might be quite frustrating because there's movement in the classroom, and this is not always easy for us to continue with what we're doing. But again, we need to be mindful that these young people have to do these things. It is completely necessary for them to process the environment. And for many, this will be their stimming. This will be their way of supporting themselves to calm down and to regulate independently. So again, being really, really mindful not to stop them or prevent them from doing these things that they absolutely need in order to access their learning. And again, we've got a lot of individuals that will be seeking movement and they will fidget, and it will be really hard for them to focus and stay still. I'm just really thinking what adaptations can be put into place, what can we do to allow those individuals to have those breaks and for it to not impact upon their learning too. So yeah, a lot of our individuals, they do get misunderstood, and bearing in mind, obviously you've been attending the autism training, but not all of the staff within your school will have been or will have the knowledge that you have. So again, just sharing this information, because although it might look like inattention or distraction, it could well be caused by sensory processing challenges, and it's important that we share that with our colleagues too. So as well as that distraction and inattentiveness, it might be that our autistic population are more distressed and anxious in the classroom setting, and that can be for a number of reasons. It can bring on intense anger when a classroom is too loud and too noisy, and so you might get those outbursts. If individuals are too close to them or they're expected to do group work, again, this can really cause severe distress and discomfort. The feeling of other people knocking into them can be really distressing. It can really create anxiety, and that overstimulation can occur, and at times that can result in a real shutdown. And often there is limited participation of these children because they're finding it so difficult. They're easily overwhelmed in the classroom and in the school environment, and it may be that they just walk out of the classroom altogether, and then there's gaps in learning. So the classroom is, of course, extremely challenging for young autistic people, and we do see, and I know a couple of you mentioned it, the attendance then goes down. There's gaps in learning. Us as practitioners want to fill those gaps and support those individuals, but it's incredibly difficult if they're not attending school. However, in terms of all those sensory difficulties that individuals had, and this is what really strikes me as a teacher, and I've worked in early years and primary, and I've been working in secondary schools more recently, but stimulating senses can actually really increase learning, because that multisensory approach is actually proven to be really supportive. So what I will say is it's an absolute juggling act, because on one hand, we want to make our lessons as exciting and creative as possible. We want to offer movement. We want to offer all this messy play or real life experiences. But we know they can absolutely have a detrimental effect too. So I've left a couple of links on there for you to explore in a little bit more detail should you want to. But sensory learning can be really helpful for children with special educational needs. But we've got to balance that with their individual needs in terms of how they process things in their kind of sensory profile. So rest assured, I understand the dilemmas that some of you will be having in the environment and when planning lessons. I've been there too. So in terms of what we can do, because it's not all doom and gloom, and lots of us are doing these things already, and we're doing a great job. Young autistic people who often experience sensory processing challenges may be inattentive and distraction. They may feel distressed and anxious, and they may have limited participation, which affects learning opportunities. But given that the sensory processing challenges are noticeable only in certain contexts, for example, our schools, it is necessary to identify those specific factors in our environment that affect children's learning and school life. So before we start thinking about interventions, we need to be starting to think about adaptations to our school environment. Okay, so we're looking at the bigger picture, and we're looking about adaptations in the environment prior to looking at those individual interventions, really. Often we get our EHCPs and it lists off all the things we need to do to make sure that child acts in a certain way or is able to access certain things. That's all well and good, but if the whole environment is too overwhelming, those little interventions aren't going to make a huge amount of difference. So we really want to be thinking about the factors in the environment that are triggering these sensory difficulties and making those adaptations, which for some of these adaptations can be really easily put in. So we want to just be thinking about the ways that we can make small changes. And I think I may have shared a slide similar to this before with you, but the most simple classroom adaptations that we want to be putting into place, and for many of you, especially those of you that are in secondary schools, your classrooms are very much clutter-free, very organised. The corridors are reduced in terms of that kind of visual stimuli. I think sometimes we have difficulties in the corridors with noise, but depending on timings, it may be that we can support our autistic learners to move around the schools at quieter times. Primary classrooms are much busier and much more chaotic. The expectations in primary classrooms in terms of displays, having worked in them myself before, it's just outrageous, the expectation on what needs to be on a wall at a certain time. I think for many of the secondary schools, you've got it quite, in terms of the visual stimuli, it's much more limited, which is really helpful. But we've got to bear in mind the auditory stimuli in corridors, and those extra transitions can make it really tricky. But what we want to do is we want to make sure there are those quiet spaces either within classrooms or in the wider school environment. You know, we can't be expecting all children to be at the same place at the same time, so we want to have a bit of breakout space for them. I know we've discussed in sessions before about how hard that is, but it is absolutely vital in order for some of our autistic people to, have that break in the day so that they can continue to access learning and continue to feel safe and calm at school. And lastly, we really want to be encouraging our young people to recognise those sensory differences and to seek out or be supported to seek out those strategies which will help them with regulation. Now, obviously, everybody's schools are completely different, and I know some of you more recently than others have conducted autism-friendly audits on your own schools, and some of you have contacted Cognos for those kind of supports as well. I did a little bit of digging in terms of what different checklists and what toolkits are around. The one that I've used most frequently has been the Autism Education Trust ones, which are the bottom left-hand corner links that are well worth a look. If you wanted something a little bit more streamlined and you wanted to do an audit in your school environment, this top one from South West Yorkshire Partnership is quite a simplistic one, as it might be worth having a little look at that one yourselves. And again, we've got the autism friendly checklist for classrooms from the NAS, and I really would urge you to set aside some time, or if you're senior leadership, you might want to do this yourself. If you're not, you might want to seek permission to do this, or to try and get maybe more people on board to audit each of their classrooms, because by completing an audit, it will give you suggestions into what adaptations you may well need that you haven't thought of yet. So there's lots of links there to have a go at, should you wish to, see how well you're doing so far. I quite like those tools that are on there, and like I said before, the Autism Education Trust is the ones that I've used most recently, but the NAS and the South West Yorkshire Partnership have got some really useful tools on there. So I would urge you to click the links and just have a little look for yourselves, maybe have a go at doing an audit on your own setting, and review it regularly to make sure that new initiatives don't come in that go against supporting your autistic young people. Again, there's a link for primary and a link for secondary school here in terms of strategies to help pupils within the classroom. And I really liked this, which is how to be a sensory friendly teacher. Have a look at the links on there. When I run these training programs, I spend a lot of time seeing what's out there rather than creating everything myself, because there is so much information if you can find good quality stuff. So I would urge you to have a little look at some of the links on there. Some of them are really good reads, and especially this autism friendly classrooms document, the primary and secondary, they're things that you could probably circulate around to all staff with just a few little tips. And they're both little pamphlets that you can just circulate to promote knowledge and understanding of best ways to support. At Cognos, we do these as well. And I know Carla's school, you had this, I think about 3 years ago with Rebecca Duffus. She came in and conducted an autism friendly audit at St. Phil's, which was quite good. But if any of your schools would be interested in an autism friendly audit, but do get in touch, because that is something we can offer. It's quite useful. It can include CPD for all staff as well, and it can create an action plan which we can help you to kind of work on together. Now, it's not just the classrooms that we need to be thinking about adapting. We want to make sure that the organisation is there in the classrooms. We want to be making sure that our autistic people are prepared. And that might just be that we keep a bank of resources ready for them so that they're ready to access without having that pressure of trying to find everything that they might need. And my suggestion would be if you're working with autistic people, have a couple of extra sheets, have a zip bag that's got, you know, a ruler, a protractor, you know, all of those things that individual will need and probably or may not have to hand. It may well just help them to access the session and not feel overwhelmed in the moment. Thinking about overlays for individuals that need overlays, thinking about visuals for those that need visuals. Many of these are more primary based, but I would consider if you don't have access to laptops for your autistic people and that's something that they do need, that's quite an easy fix in order for them to be able to access instructions and things, and to be able to work independently. So in terms of being able to regulate from that kind of those sensory difficulties, we all do it in different ways. The left-hand side is some lovely visuals that more based at our primary pupils, but on the right-hand side is our older individuals are going to be using, you know, many of us are using calming music these days, using the gym to regulate. And I think it's really important that we, you know, really normalize this, that we model, you know, I'm accessing this strategy to help me feel calm because this is what's happened to me today, or this is what's triggered an emotion in me, and really helping all young people to, you know, just to be able to express those things. You know, try and have that open dialogue. I mean, for many of the secondary learners, your pupils are going to know exactly what works for them and what doesn't work for them. And if they don't, perhaps ask them to consider journaling, because that can really help identify those changes in mood and working out what's triggering that kind of overload. So there's some general strategies here. Like I said, we want to start off by adapting our environment and making it more autism friendly, but then we need to be supporting the individual with their specific sensory needs. Now, I've put a link on here, which is a sensory toolkit. And on the left-hand side where there's that list, on their sensory toolkit, it has pages and pages and pages of each of the 8 senses and how you might support them using generalized strategies. Okay, so this is for those individuals that may not have an OT provision yet. And the image in the middle is an app that I found that was recommended to me to support individuals that require an OT input. It is a paid app though, so bear in mind if you are going to suggest it to families, it's not a free one, unfortunately. But this toolkit that I've linked on there is really, really good. And it is just for general strategies. So not everything is going to work for everyone. Yeah, it's definitely not a blanket approach, and definitely before implementing anything, you know, do have a chat with an OT just to ensure the appropriateness. But some of the stuff I've put in here is just a nice guide to kind of open your eyes as to what might work or what could work or what might be a useful strategy. And then moving on, you might want to be thinking about sensory profiles. So these are quite simplistic ones. Again, these ones are from West Sussex. And again, it's not just autistic people that may want or may need a sensory profile, but writing down what works and what doesn't work, what individuals are seeking and what they're avoiding can be quite helpful as well. And you know, really do include parents and therapists, especially the occupational therapists as well, to create a sensory profile. Oh, I've skipped forward, sorry. Later down the line, if your autistic young people have had an assessment by an occupational therapist, you should receive a copy of the report. And I've certainly been given long lists of things that I could be doing and should be doing, and I know how difficult it can be to implement those things. It might be that you just select 1 or 2 of those strategies and start with that and see how that works. And if it works, keep it. And if it doesn't work, move on to another suggested strategy or ask a member of support staff to help with that. Now, OTs often suggest sensory diets, and I don't know how much everybody knows about sensory diets. It can be a bit confusing. So I saw this analogy, I thought it was quite nice, but just thinking that as individuals who eat, we eat usually about 3 times a day, on breakfast, a lunch, and a dinner, and in between we have snacks. And so when we're thinking about schools, we want to be, when we're thinking about supporting individuals in schools, we want to be making sure that there is a sensory main meal, that's like lunchtime, and we want to be making sure there are some sensory snacks throughout the day too. It's going to look different depending on the individual you work with. In primary schools, it might be possible to have a support assistant able to, implement a sensory circuit, or maybe able to take the individual for a walk around the school grounds if that's helpful and calming. In secondary schools, it's much more difficult at times. But on the plus side, you've got to bear in mind that many of your young people are going to be fully aware of their needs. They're going to be able to tell you what accommodations they need. They might be able to say to you, it helps me to listen to music when you've set me a task. And that might be something that you can put into place or allow for them. Again, if you've got those safe spaces or quiet spaces at break time and lunchtime, if they've got access to their noise cancelling earbuds, or if they've got the opportunity to walk off site during the school day, that can really help them with the sensory diet and ensure that they continue to attend and continue to be able to access learning. I've highlighted a few bits on here because I thought this was pretty good, but the aim of those sensory diets is to help individuals learn to self-regulate, and they've got to be taught about their sensory systems. So it's no good just saying to them, we're going to do all of these things. We need to be explaining to them why we're doing it, and that it isn't their fault. Because I think for many of our young people, they think that they are the problem. That's not the case. The environment is the difficult space. They are not the difficult. They're not the difficulty. So we just want to be making sure that we're speaking to the parents and to the young people, thinking about what activities are already working and what's already working well, and then just choose 1 or 2 at a time and experiment to see what is working and what isn't, and record that information and share that information amongst staff, especially at secondary schools, because if you find in your whichever lesson you're teaching, you've got a strategy that works for that young person, use those round robins, use that information sharing systems to make sure that if that individual is able to access learning in your room, there's every possibility that if they've got the same adaptation in place, they will be able to access it in other classes too. If that sensory diet is working, that individual will feel calmer and will begin to join in with other activities too. Now, for those of you that haven't got access to an occupational therapist, I just thought I'd pop this slide in, which gives some information about Cognos Therapies. If you click on the link that says Cognos Therapies, there's actually the graduated response for education and therapy support. And I don't know if any of you have seen that document, but there are tons and tons and tons, I mean, it's pages long, of occupational therapy support that can be embedded within schools. So if you haven't looked at it yet, I'd urge you to have a little look, scroll all the way down. It's not specific to autism, but it is available for everybody, and it just kind of expresses what can be done in schools, and more specialist services. And then on that left-hand corner there, I've just added in the traded stuff. So if you wanted to buy a package from Cognos, I'm not trying to push it, but I know for some of you, then you need a little bit more support than others. So the information's there if you need it. It doesn't come via me, but your contacts are there if you did want to speak to the therapies team. And equally, if you've got a therapist that comes in to support someone already, ask them what they're doing, ask them why they're doing it, get the information while they're there. It's the best way to get high quality information. They're really good, the therapies team. So yeah, do reach out. And then in terms of, and this is from the checklist for the autism friendly environments from the Southwest Yorkshire Partnership. There is a lot more depth than just the physical environment. And I think when we talk about autism friendly environments, we really are just thinking about classrooms, corridors, outside spaces. Some of these audits are much more in depth. So I'd urge you to have a little look at these extra checklists that they have as well, because the environment does not end with the physical. So perhaps have a look at that with other members of your staff team. And equally, making sure you've got that open dialogue is so helpful in terms of supporting individuals. So just let those children or those young people in your care know that, you know, all of their feelings are okay and they are not the problem. Let them know that everybody experiences those moments of calm, of stress, of anger, of frustration, and we need to be normalizing that through our modeling, explaining to them that it's safe to feel those ways, but it's not okay to be unsafe or to act out. Consider trying to help them to identify those triggers. And like I said before, journaling is quite useful. Give them time in the day to balance emotions. So again, this is like thinking about those sensory diets. That can be really key in helping them to regulate and feel safe and secure. Thinking about those safe ways to express their emotions. For some individuals, they're not going to be talking to you at all. They might want to write something down. They might not say or do anything, but they might be able to talk at home, and families might be able to send an email in to help, you know, explain what the difficulties they're having are. And then, you know, hopefully as pupils gain a little bit more knowledge of themselves and understand that, you know, they are not the problem, they are that they just need a little bit of guidance and support. Hopefully then they'll be able to start advocating for their own needs and for their own wants as well. I'm going to flick very quickly through and just show you. For primary schools, there's lots of different slides on here and loads of different areas to look at. There's some regulatory activities here. And then moving down to secondaries, there's a load more links on organising classrooms, adapting lessons accordingly, talking with parents and how that might help, a bit of behaviour stuff as well. So and this is a photograph of one way that might support secondary pupils to identify, you know, what's triggering their difficulties too. So yeah, there's loads more on there which we're not going to cover today, but tons on there for you should you want to do any further research. And that is it for today. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm going to stop the share and I'm going to stop the recording now. And then we can you can ask or answer any questions.